Laurent was here a little while ago helping to install the exhibition, so he's seen it both in its Paris version and in its New York version. And I thought it would be interesting for all of you to get a sense of how two different specialized fashion museums work on an exhibition. This is our first collaboration, but I hope it won't be our last, because it's been a real pleasure to work with people from another fashion museum and learn from their collection and their approach. So let me see if I can handle this. Here we go. All right. I first heard about this idea for an exhibition several years ago when I was at the Dior Couture show, and they put all of the museum people together. So I was sitting next to Olivier Saillard, and I asked him what he was working on, and he said that he was working on a show about Jean Lanvin and Azzedine Alaïa, and one about the Countess Greffulhe. And I got very excited and said, oh, can I work on that one? Can I write for the catalog? Maybe I can bring it to New York. And he was kind of, you know who she is? And I'm like, yeah, I'm a big Proustian. She's famous. I hadn't realized that your museum has all of her clothes. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about how you acquired the clothes and how this exhibition came about.
In fact, for us, it was rather obvious to organize an exhibition about the Countess Greffulhe's wardrobe, because this wardrobe we are keeping in this museum is certainly amongst the most impressive masterpieces we have in our collection, for a lot of reasons. Finally, because those dresses, in fact, have all the qualities that we can expect in a fashion museum, because they have historical value, cultural value, an artistic value, of course, and a sentimental value as well, a literary value,
yes.
And at the same time, they are very important as well in the history of fashion, because for a lot of them, they are icons of fashion. And everybody knows, of course, the robe au lis photographed by Nadar, the way the Countess used to wear that, to create her own character, to create an ideal image of herself. And yes, in fact, this dress in particular, the robe au lis, is maybe our Mona Lisa, the Mona Lisa of our museum. There's something else which is very interesting in this collection. It's not such a big collection. For concerning the Countess, we have something like 117 items from her wardrobe, which is not a lot, actually, especially for a lady who had such a long life. We can assume that she had a fashion life of 60 years. And especially for this period, from the end of the 19th century until the end of the 30s, for the pieces we have in our collection, because we don't have any dress or any coat or anything after the end of the 30s. We can imagine that her wardrobe counted something like, I don't know, thousands of dresses, thousands of items. And the more than 100 items which were kept, I think, very cautiously by her family and by herself. And finally, the family and the Countess herself made a work of curator, keeping the very important ones, the dresses which were part of herself, which were, it's very difficult to dissociate the dresses from the owner and from the
of course,
and
Baudelaire said, "Who would separate a dress from a woman?"
Exactly, and sometimes, you know her through photographs, through portraits, and through all the things we know about her in literature, with Proust, of course, but with the Goncourt brothers, with all the journalists who wrote about her. But she constructed finally the image of the virtual queen of France, of the Third Republic. And she, at the same time, was could be compared to a sort of very prominent actress whose stage was the city of Paris itself.
And in the photographs, which she staged as well.
Yes, as she as well studied photographs with Nadar.
So when we brought the exhibition over, we obviously switched it from La Mode Retrouvée and called it Proust's Muse, because I felt that for Americans, it would be necessary to introduce her via Proust, that Proust had, in a sense, immortalized her. Although, as when we hear later from her biographer, we'll see how, in a sense, also she was cast in the shadow of the Guermantes. People forgot how famous she'd been. But this was one of the ways in which our exhibition was different. But we'll continue with more images of the dresses and the exhibitions. Both in Paris and here, we showed a variety of photographs of her and her life. And here we see her at the age of about 18, being married off to her husband, the Vicomte, later Count Greffulhe. She was from a very aristocratic family, was very, very beautiful, but was not very rich.
No.
And her parents arranged this marriage with someone who was extremely rich, but as it turned out, also Philistine, jealous, unfaithful, a very unsatisfactory husband.
Absolutely, but generous at the same time, because perhaps he felt guilty about his behavior or something. I hope so. Anyway, but he was extremely generous with her, and finally she had the opportunity to organize the life she wanted, which was not necessarily so easy when she was a very young girl.
Yes.
in love with her husband, because I would like to quote one little sentence from an etiquette book of the end of the 19th century, and you would see how easy it could have been for her to be the very prominent figure of Paris society and the cultural field in our country, with all the things she does. Well, so I quote this little sentence, which is, "The most respectable woman is she of whom people talk at least, and the most perfect is she whom people do not speak at all."
Exactly. So on the one hand, you have a husband who's perfectly willing to buy her magnificent couture dresses,
Yes.
but he also doesn't want her to be conspicuous at all.
No.
But too bad for him, because within a couple of years of the marriage, she was very conspicuous and very written about indeed.
Yes.
Just here we have a list of some of the essays in the catalog. I don't know if you wanted to just say a few words about the different approaches taken throughout the catalog.
Oh, yes, the different essays we have, in fact, are just accompanying the exhibitions, because Olivier Saillard wanted something a little like a jigsaw, well, a complete jigsaw, of course, because the wardrobe is incomplete, is very impressive, but incomplete. And we have the same thing with the drawings, for instance, with the photographs. We have a lot of documents about her, of course, but we have to, well, in fact, our public in Paris had to reconstruct one's ideal image of the Countess. It's a work which was necessarily subjective, of course, because we don't have the same feeling towards one dress or another, or one drawing or something like that. We don't have necessarily the same interpretations. But Olivier wanted something, wanted, in fact, the public to be a little creative visiting this exhibition, which was like a little stroll in the life and in the remains, because finally there are remains of the Countess, and giving the freedom to everybody to have one's own idea of who she was, and to finally write in one's mind the perfect novel about her life, about who she was. That was the point, and that's the same thing finally with the catalogue.
Different approaches to
Yes.
her. I mean, here you see a dress from the 1880s by a minor couturier, but with this sort of old rose color. This is while she's still young and a little bit more conventional. Very quickly, she starts to wear clothing which is more extreme.
Yeah.
Normally it would be actresses and courtesans who would set the fashions because they have had less constraints on them. But what was really remarkable is then she starts to work with the designers to create these very striking clothes, so that the press said she preferred to look bizarre rather than banal. She didn't want to look like anyone else. And they even wondered, whether her dresses are made for her or by her, they always have to be different than everyone else's. So you said something to me yesterday, which is so true, that she was a fashion icon, but not a trendsetter, because no one could really copy her.
No, it was rather impossible, I think, to copy her, because of course, those dresses were extremely, extremely expensive. So she was extremely daring in her choice. That was something completely close to her personality. So, well, she sometimes was decided to be out of fashion for one reason or another. Would it be only with the princess line?
Yes, exactly. So something like this, or the lily dress, we'll see, princess line wasn't in fashion, but it's very, very flattering to her beautiful figure.
I think there's maybe another interpretation. It's an interpretation of mine about the princess line. For her, I told you, I think she assumed one way the role of sort of queen of Paris, and the princess line is something absolutely typical and symbolic of court fashion during this period. In fact, when court fashion is always a little late to fashion, to real fashion, for many reasons, not to be compared to courtesans, for instance. And princess line comes from the dress for the wedding of the Princess of Wales. So maybe there's also this logic of a court fashion she decided to wear, just to show her prominent position in the society. And when we look at her clothes, I think we always have to keep in mind that she was a very important cultural entrepreneur during this period. She supported also the scientists. In the political life of our country, she was very, very important too, and she was extremely courageous, especially in her social class.
Yes.
Being a very strong supporter of Captain Dreyfus during the Dreyfus Affair.
Which was unprecedented. Everyone else was lined up with the church and the army.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for all these reasons, she had to look absolutely unique and very impressive. It's just for these goals she wanted to achieve. But it's not only that. Finally, because she took a great pleasure of being admired, and so on. There are many lines about it. But maybe it was for something else. It was for supporting the causes in which she strongly believed.
Well, you certainly see, for example, in the Goncourt diary, when Edmond de Goncourt describes her as having this aristocratic and artistic elegance. And it's that combination which is very striking. So that he also said that she was always distinguished but often eccentric. So kind of a distinguished eccentric like her uncle, Count Robert de Montesquieu. So the two of them, these sort of dandified aesthetic figures who, in part because of their position in the aristocracy, felt that they could do anything they wanted and nobody would dare stop them.
And it's funny because I wonder, in one way, if the models of Montesquieu and the Comtesse were not, for instance, King Louis II of Bavaria and the Empress of Austria at the same time, because there's the connection between the two of them is as strong as the connection between the two cousins in Austria and Bavaria. For her generation, for the generation of the Comtesse, I think the symbol of beauty and aristocracy was certainly Empress Sissi in those days. And sometimes I have the impression, but it's once again only an impression of mine, that she tried to not to imitate her, but maybe it was a strong a strong model for her? Would it be only for the way of emphasizing her waist, of the way of standing, and
Yes.
for the allure, finally?
Well, of course, the press at the time always talked about how she would appear at a party late and briefly at the top of a staircase with a king or an emperor on either side. And she was, of course, friends with King of England, the Kaiser of Germany, the Tsar of Russia. You have here the display in Paris showing the Byzantine empress wedding dress that she wore to her daughter's wedding, where the story is that she came out 15 minutes before the bride and stood at the top of the stairs in front of the church, while below everyone was taking her picture and exclaiming, "Can that possibly be the mother?" So she totally outshone her daughter at the daughter's own wedding.
Yeah, it's a nice wedding present, actually. But here, once again, I think we have a good example of this court of fashion logic, because, well, you can see quite clearly, according to the shape of the sleeves, to the silhouette in general, that it's a little out of fashion. Finally, it's very close to the silhouette of the mid 1990s.
Yes.
And
it'll be 1904, so it's definitely out of date in that style.
Yeah, completely. And it's here that we can see that she was absolutely unique in her looks. And there's also a little movie which still exists, very, very short. It's only 5 seconds or something like that, when you can see her climbing down the stairs of the Madeleine Church in Paris. And you cannot miss her because she, well, all comparison... in fact, it's almost the silhouette of Mae West climbing down the stairs. The other lady are looking a little like tea cozies, let's say, because they were absolutely covered with furs, with lace, with ruffles, everything you want. And you see this incredible silhouette, like sort of goddess, climbing down the stairs. And it's very short, but if you have the opportunity, try to look at it on the internet.
In effect, dragging her sables along the ground.
Yeah.
Now, you also had in Paris, which we didn't have here, these amazing sketches. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Oh, yes, of course. Those sketches have a very interesting story because the meeting between Hello, that everybody, no, perhaps you don't know necessarily this painter, but I think you know, you know his painting because you have it on the ceiling of Grand Central Station. Well, he's a very important social painter of the period. He was a quite close friend to Robert de Montesquieu, and the sketches were, in fact, there were something like 100 of sketches for the meeting of the Countess and of the painter, and they were made prior to the big portrait of the Countess, which is a very big pastel you will see later, and which is almost a sort of dynastic portrait. But in fact, Hello spent something like 1 week in the castle of the Greffulhe family. And during this week, he made all those sketches. For day after day, the intimacy was more and more important, but it remained decent, of course. But it's not so obvious when you have a look at those drawings. After a while, you can see her like abandoned on the sofa. She's not very dressed up anyway. And I don't know, a sharp tongue in Paris by those days could have imagined quite easily an affair between the painter, who was a sort of Don Juan, as Consuelo Vanderbilt said in a few letters. And the painter wanted to present those drawings, those sketches, during one salon. He was supported by Edgar Degas and Claude Monet by those days, and the Countess refused all the time to have them presented in the salon, because in spite her husband was a very deceitful man. He was at the same time extremely jealous
and violent.
And violent, yeah.
Now, this in particular was the photograph that inspired the whole mise-en-scene for Proust's Muse in New York. Because in addition to collaborating with designers like Worth to create the dresses she wanted, like this famous lily dress with the princess line and the lilies referring to a poem in her honor that Robert de Montesquieu had written, describing her eyes as black pistils in a silver lily. In addition to that collaboration with the couturiers, she also collaborated closely with photographers. So whether with Paul Nadar or with Otto, she would stage scenes, for example, portraying herself in front of a Psyche, a full-length mirror. And she wrote in her private papers talking about the idea of the mirror and looking into the mirror. So this was kind of my inspiration for how we try and arrange the show. And so when you go and see it, the central platform has her in front of the mirror, and then in the background, a large scrim, which was, the scrim was Olivier's idea. He wanted it to be like at a photographer's studio. But then there's always accidents. They sent the fabric and it was wrinkly, and we couldn't get the wrinkles out of it. And our poor architect was beside herself and said, it looks like laundry. Unironed laundry. We have to take down all of these. But fortunately, our lighting designer had the brilliant idea of putting these sort of gobos on it, which made a kind of abstract, somewhat Art Nouveau pattern, which ended up being, I think, even more evocative than the white material. But then if you step back in the room, you'll see that we have a total of only 28 dresses here. In Paris, you showed about 48, something like that?
Yeah, exactly, almost 50.
Yeah. And normally we show 75 in this room. So early on, I was trying to pare down. I remember walking through with Olivier going, yes, yes, no, trying to figure out which were just the best of the best dresses. And of course, Laurent is so spoiled by the magnificent dresses he has there. One of them, he's like, oh, that one is sort of a dog. We'll just put it in the corner. And my colleague Fred and I were going, we would love to have that dress. So this was the way then we arranged it, and I tried to have it mostly chronological so that people could get a sense of her style at different periods. And now to shoot back to Paris, here you can see the videotape of some of the footage of her, which we also have in the show, but then the arrangement as it was in the Galliera, when the entrance was through that door on the left.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you certainly notice also this little sort of construction, the stage construction in the middle. In fact, it was a reminder of the little shelter she had constructed. She had bit story in her drawing room in Paris during the Second World War. In fact, she was living in this little shelter because it was very cold and it was very difficult to have coal or wood to heat this very, very big mansion. And it's an idea that
was where you got the idea. I wondered about that because her life went on so long, from the middle of the 19th century to the middle of the 20th century. It's hard to imagine that she survived the Nazi occupation of Paris in her home, but then unable to heat the home. So building this little kind of shack in her salon where she could have one friend with her.
It's incredible, in fact, to consider all the period she covered, because we were talking about it previously before the symposium, and she was there for the first collection of Christian Dior in Paris in 47, and she said this historical sentence. Oh yes, he will go far, this little Christian.
Yes. Well, she'd seen them all, Worth, Poiret, etc.
Yeah.
Now, here's where you placed the lily dress, and then again with an image. There's a lot of image focus in the exhibition in Paris next to the clothes. We kind of segregated our images, partly, I think, because of you have such a different space.
Yes.
Yours is a 1930s building that was once a private home.
And that's it, and it's quite funny because, in fact, you decided to start, and I think it's a brilliant idea with this dress in particular, which is the ideal vision of herself and created by herself. And as for us, we ended with this dress,
Yeah.
and but it's impossible to see it on the photo, and because it's a very very small document. But we ended also with her ID card when she chose the photo by Nadar to stick it on her ID card.
Which is so incredible and so amazing that you had
and
that.
it says a lot of things, in fact, because for her, this photo and this dress were the very best for the construction of her character, I think.
Now, some clothes, of course, are always too fragile to be on mannequins. But some of them were so important. Like this one, the garden party dress that she wore to a party that Robert de Montesquieu gave and that Proust wrote about anonymously as a society journalist, saying, you know, Madame la Countess Greffulhe looked beautiful in her pink lilac dress covered with orchids. So I knew I wanted this, but I didn't want it in the boxes that you look down on. And so taking a tip from another one of your shows, your Lanvin show, where there were cases with a glass one, we modified those, and it worked so perfectly with the mirror theme because the dresses were reflected in mirrors and became a little bit like ghosts of the Countess hovering over the exhibition.
It's really funny because it's always a question, a matter of ghosts, but I think it's much more effective in the FIT Museum than it was in Paris, when it was a little morbid. In fact, it was like a sort of crystal coffin, and personally, I had a little problem with that, and I think it works well like that. And as perhaps you know, for a while she was very much involved in occult sciences, and finally, there she is.
And with dresses like these too, you can see how Proust didn't just say, here's the Countess, I'm going to transform her into the Duchesse de Guermantes, because in fact, there were several women who inspired the Duchesse de Guermantes, Madame de Chévigné, Madame Strauss, but also aspects of the Countess Greffulhe went into other characters. So this pink and mauve, that really went into Odette de Crécy, the courtesan, who appears first as the lady in pink.
That's the same thing with Madame Verdurin, because sometimes I think she's a little caricatured with Madame Verdurin, with her love for the music of Wagner, for instance, when she said, "Oh, it's so sublime, I have headaches during 2 days." And I'm sure it's something coming from the Countess Greffulhe mouth. And maybe it's one of the reasons why she was not so pleased to recognize her in the novel by Proust.
Yes, well, I gather we'll find out more from her biographer, but that she didn't read it.
She said she didn't read it. But
like bad reviews, maybe you're tempted to look at them. So we put our photographs in the introductory room, and one thing that we did, again, was tied into mirrors with this quote from Montesquieu, but also, whereas your selection was mostly of her husband, her daughter, and Robert de Montesquieu, I wanted to put in here people like Proust, Alfred Dreyfus, Marie Curie, other Diaghilev, people that were a part of her larger world. In part, I think I wanted to partly counteract the strong impression of narcissism that you get from reading her own words, and talk about how she was also a great philanthropist.
Yes.
The husband gave her money for clothes, but not for her various charities.
But no, we would have another exhibition to organize, perhaps not in the Fashion Museum, but something about Countess Greffulhe and the arts would be absolutely incredible. And maybe in New York it should be done, because she was very close to Henschel, and you know the importance of Henschel in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But she organized with him little exhibitions on the decorative arts, on the French decorative arts, in Paris and in New York as well, and even on transatlantic ships. The the same time, well, the story of the Titanic put an end to this idea. But well, there's a very important connection with her and the arts in general about the turn of the 20th century.
Yes.
Maybe I'm a bit
No, we have
too long.
time. We're in good shape. So it's just another shot of how that's the exterior. And we have the Rick Owens, which was an idea, again, that Olivier had, because Rick said he loved the show in Paris so much, he thought it was the best show he'd seen in Paris. And so I asked him to lend us something sort of as inspired by the Countess, by a contemporary designer. Now, going back to Paris, here's the painting that you mentioned.
Ah, yes.
And the wonderful Russian cape that was a gift from the Tsar.
Exactly. Well, she used there's something very, very unusual with the Countess Greffulhe for the use of her dresses, and so, because, well, as you know, she was extremely rich, but that didn't keep her from using several times, and sometimes over a decade, the same very iconic dresses or the same iconic, the very iconic outfits. It was something showing her importance in Europe, well, her position with the sovereigns, and she had this cape transformed in the beginning of the 20th century, changing the color, for instance, as she said. Yes, I'm sorry with my little quotation. To make the briefest of appearance, to be the center of attention. Well, that's.
Exactly.
A good idea and a good strategy. And we may think it's for this strategy in particular that she reused the same very, very emblematic garment several times, because as an actress, finally, she was expected for one type of attire, one type of allure, and so, and it's why she reused several times the cape, why she reused several times the robe au lis also,
yes.
Because she was very famous for that. I think it's like an actress or an opera singer sometimes.
It's extraordinary, because some people say, oh, did she only wear those clothes once? And I say, on the contrary, she had them altered. Here we just see again, this one of my truly favorite ones, this Worth reception dress. When you look at the extraordinary clothes like this, it's striking. She wrote to Montesquieu about how, returning from the opera, she felt so exhilarated by the eyes of the crowd on her. And then she makes this remarkable statement that she said, how can one live having known the great anonymous caress of the crowd's gaze? How can you survive if you no longer have that? So, I mean, she was sort of sucking up the gaze and feeling from that all the power that a great actor or a politician would get from the crowd looking at her.
Yeah.
Here we show the cape somewhat differently puffed out. So there were discussions with people on your staff as to whether it should be more full or less full.
But we didn't have the same type of textile to hold it in Paris, and here it's much more efficient. I mean, we are trying to find exactly the same thing in Paris at the moment, because it works very well, and it looks much more natural because in Paris it was looking a little like the Virgin of the Macarena or something like that. She looked really like a sort of a Spanish religious statue. And,
yes.
But that's something else. In fact, maybe she assumed to be a sort of goddess, or to be a sort of saint at the same time. She didn't want to look natural. That was not the idea at all. But here, I think it's closer to reality, and it's closer also to the photographs by Otto. We know, we know of her with wearing this coat.
So in the early 20th century, then in the teens, she sort of enters into another phase of fashion when she goes towards this Orientalist style, clothes by Fortuny, by Babani. And again, Proust is inspired by this, just as he used her as the model for the Duchesse de Guermantes as the most fashionable woman in Paris. Now he talks about how the Duchesse was wearing these amazing clothes with gold like butterflies on them. And he's like, who made that? And she goes, Fortuny. And then he goes, could my girlfriend, could Albertine wear those? And then the Duchess is going, oh yes, your young lady could wear these. And so in effect, he's bribing Albertine to stay with him by giving her all of these Fortuny dresses and other couture gowns.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because it shows us very clearly that she was in an artistic social ground,
Yes.
and that's obvious with those dresses. Well, you know this the thing in France for calling the bobo, the bourgeois bohème thing. Well, it was a little more than
Yes.
bourgeois bohème. It was aristo
Yeah.
bohème finally
Yes.
for this period. Well, here it's not particular. It's not unique because
No.
a lot of women of the same social class were used to wear that, especially in Great Britain, when Fortuny was extremely popular until the end of the 1930s. Here it's very interesting too because it's not a matter of fashion, but more a matter of style for this part of
Yes.
the exhibition. But I think it shows very well the artistic aspect of
Yes.
of her wardrobe. There's something we may regret. It's not to have any evidence. She used to buy something at Paul Poiret's shop, or
Yes, it was disappointing
Yeah.
couldn't
we
tell
have a
whether.
coat which is
Right.
very close to the production of Paul Poiret before the 1910s, but well, we don't have any label on it. Maybe
Yes.
she crossed the border with it and undid the label, not to have taxes to pay on it. But that's something which happens,
Yes,
which happened
people cut them out.
very often. But the shape of the coat, that we'll see a little later, is very close to the production of Poiret by those days.
Well, and I think that there's a connection too with her patronage of the Ballet Russe, that this whole wave of Orientalism that was going across Europe is tied in with this Orientalist styles. And even her husband used to make fun of her and Montesquieu and their friends and call them the Japanese.
Yes.
Because they were into all of this aesthetic thing.
Yeah, it said a lot of things.
And here we have again another view in Paris.
Oh, yes, and you can see the evening coat just in the middle,
Yes.
the yellow one, and you will see how it's presented here. And I think it's once again much more efficient because you will have a better idea of the silhouette. Yeah.
Well, here we sort of
There we
move
are.
from the late teens through the 20s. And here, I guess you could say she's really maybe partly stuck in this Orientalist phase. You have things that are Japanese-inspired, Egyptian-inspired, Chinese-inspired. They're very beautiful. And maybe a little bit like the kind of fanciful clothes that Proust describes the Princesse de Guermantes wearing at the opera box.
Yeah, it's closer to the Princesse de Guermantes this time for the look.
Oops, sorry, let me go back one. And then we have the 30s section where at this point she's really very elderly. She's in her 80s at this point, or
she's
late
between
70s or 80s.
72 and 78 when she wore those.
So she's
in fact, here it's not unique. It's not a creation. It's more, well, let's say, low profile, but in haute couture, in the field of haute couture. But perhaps we can imagine that during this period, well, we don't have to imagine it, but she was not the Queen of Paris anymore. There were other women very important by those days. Would it be only Marie-Laure de Noailles and so? In fact, her reign was a little behind her.
Yes.
But maybe by those days when she entered a salon with those very, very simple and very striking long black dress, she gave lessons to a lot of young women, saying, well, that's the very elegance, and that's the very chic.
Well, in fact, you have Robert de Montesquieu saying how she was like a gazelle that had seized a piece of black velvet and was dragging it gracefully after her. Or my favorite is a scene that Proust wrote in an early version of the novel, which then George Painter quotes in his biography, where the character based on the Countess says, "I shall know when I've lost my beauty, when people no longer turn and look at me in the street." And then the Madame Standish character goes, "Keep dressing the way you do, and they'll always turn and look." Oops, sorry, I'm going backwards by mistake. And back in Paris, you've grouped them here we see the same ones that we just saw on the
it
platform.
was more grouped by color, but it's displayed another way in New York with the cape on the dress
and then again, you can see here how the architecture in the Galliera, sometimes in a way, it's so beautiful, but it fights with the exhibition.
Absolutely, it does. Here it does, with the lighting. Maybe it's, we could have avoided the ceiling for a while, just to focus on the dresses, on the garments, I think.
And then here you have some only of the wide array of accessories that you had in Paris, including things that belonged to her husband and her daughter. I didn't even try to bring, the Bird of Paradise hat to New York. I knew that would never make it through customs.
Oh yes, with the CITES, things it was absolutely terrible.
But we were inspired very much by your case. So when we did it, it's much smaller, but again with the idea that you can pull out and look at the stockings and so on underneath. And the hat on the upper part, that's one from 1941, made of things like cellophane. So it was cheaply made during the Nazi occupation of Paris.
Yes.
And then, of course, the red shoes. I was thrilled that you had these because everybody who's read Proust knows how the red shoes of the Duchesse de Guermantes are such a devastating story. Although in point of fact, it's a perfect example of how Proust took real life and transformed it. Because in real life, it was Madame Strauss whose husband said, "Sweetie, you're wearing black shoes with a red dress." And it wasn't anything cruel. It wasn't, rejecting their friend Swann. It was just, and Proust ran upstairs and said, "Oh, I'll get the red shoes." So an ordinary event turns into a very devastating moment in the novel.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's quite curious because the character of the Duchess de Guermantes is not particularly sympathetic, and it was not the case of the Countess, who was very true to her friends in general.
And you were telling me about this, which is so cool, with the red-headed woman holding the mirror. So tell them what your hypothesis is about this.
No, it's just a supposition, because we were rather surprised looking to this fan. Well, maybe you will agree with us. The quality of the painting is rather poor, not to say bad. And you cannot see very precisely, maybe on the slide, the quality of the lace, which is absolutely incredible. Same thing with the mounting of the fan. And when we see that, we can be sure that the value of the painting is sentimental. It was made too early. Too early for. It was painted by her daughter, but her her favorite sister, Guylaine, who was a lady in waiting to the Queen of the Belgian, used to be a painter as well, and according to the period, she was the beginning of her career as a painter, and I think we may imagine that it's a little painting from the sister of the Countess. Well, you can find the hues and the color she reused later in her painting, basically paintings of flowers and.
But I love that, the idea of it. She did have that auburn hair, and looking in the mirror, circling back again to the narcissism, and also the way she wanted to create an image of herself as a kind of work of art.
It's always a matter of mirror.
And then we're almost at the end. Want to talk about this? This again was in your show, but not mine.
Yes, it's an illustrator who's called Aurore de la Morinerie, who did those illustrations, something like coming from the past, a sort of memories that we have to reconstruct once again. Well, you will think that we always wanted our public to reconstruct the image of the Countess, but I think it's about it when we have the wardrobe of somebody who's dead for quite a long time. You will have only evidences of her style, of her life, and that's something we do, even if we're not conscious of it.
So again, just to conclude, when I was putting the show together and seeing it in a part through Proustian lens, it seemed to me that Proust put everything that he learned over the course of a lifetime in his novel about love and art and society and time and fashion. And I think that a lot of what he learned about fashion, he learned from Count Robert de Montesquieu and from the Countess Greffulhe. In particular, I think the fact that for them, fashion wasn't just a kind of social sign. It was emotional, psychological, it was individualistic, and it was very much a work of art.
Yeah.
So that you get finally Proust saying, or the narrator saying, that if he can't construct his novel like a cathedral, which is his ultimate symbol for the height of French civilization, if he can't build it like a cathedral, he's going to construct it simply like a dress, which I think again circles back to the idea of fashion as a work of art.
Yes, and as you wrote in your article in the catalogue, well, it's the aristocrat as a piece or as a work of art too, and I think it's something like that, because nowadays we would consider the Comtesse Greffulhe and Robert de Montesquieu as artists and create the material of their creation were themselves finally.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very dandy view.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you for your welcome.